The ad promised $600 for 2 nights at a sleep lab. I had rent due and a daytime job that cut my hours. The intake nurse spoke in a calm register. She taped sensors to my scalp and chest, then clipped a plastic ring to my finger. A second form appeared, labeled Compliance Protocol, with boxes already checked. She said it was standard, then asked me to initial every line before lights out. The room looked like a budget hotel, except for the camera bubble in the corner and the wall port for the airflow tube. They fitted a nasal cannula and told me to sleep on my back if I could. When the lights dimmed, a soft voice played from a speaker, listing numbers and short phrases. Between them came a hiss, as if a valve opened, then closed. My chest felt heavy, then it passed quickly. In the morning, they unhooked me fast, as if my body was equipment they needed back. A technician printed a graph with red spikes and pointed at one stretch, where my heart rate climbed during what he called a compliance interval. He said I did well, then slid a confidentiality sheet across the desk. It offered $200 if I agreed not to ever discuss study procedures. I signed with my name, then regretted it. Night 2 started with a new face, a man in scrubs who avoided eye contact and carried a metal case. He checked my cannula, then sealed a mask over my mouth and nose. He said it would help calibrate airflow. Through the thin wall, I heard another participant wake up coughing, then a chair scrape, then hurried footsteps. Someone spoke in the hall about a drop in saturation and about keeping the subject asleep anyway. I slept in fragments. Each time I surfaced, the speaker returned to a set of phrases: accept the schedule, confirm the hours, complete the task, wave the break. The hiss followed like punctuation. At one point, my fingers tingled and my legs kicked, the wires tugged, and I heard the camera lens adjust. I tried to call for the nurse, but the mask made my throat feel packed, and my voice came out as air. 2 days later, a recruiter called about a warehouse position I had not applied for. She read my name and address, then added a number, compliance score 87. She said the score came from a partner wellness screening and meant I could skip orientation. I started to ask where she got it, then my tongue wanted to say confirm the hours. I hung up and quietly stared at my hands until the urge passed. I drove back to the lab during business hours. A sign said the sleep unit had relocated, with a forwarding number that went to an automated menu. In the parking lot, a security guard noticed my wristband tan line and said the study ended after an adverse event. He mentioned an ambulance at 3 in the morning and a man who never woke for discharge. He told me to go home and forget the place. I called the billing office on my payment stub. A clerk emailed a statement showing who funded the project. The sponsor name matched a staffing company linked to the warehouses. Under procedures, one line read, controlled oxygen variation, cognitive compliance assessment. Another line read, post-session data delivery to employer partner. I replied that there had to be an error. The clerk wrote back that the statement was generated, and she could not edit it. At work, my manager handed me a new policy packet. It included a wellness page with a barcode and a line, sleep compliance verified. I said I had never consented to share medical data. He said it was not medical, it was performance risk. When my shift ended, he asked me to stay 2 more hours. I heard the speaker voice in my memory. Accept the schedule. My mouth moved, and I said yes again. I called a clinic and described the billing codes. The intake worker asked for my paperwork, then paused when I emailed the confidentiality sheet. She said the clause was enforceable and the damages could bankrupt me. That night I received a voicemail from a number. A woman said my compliance score had decayed, and I qualified for a booster session. She said it would keep me eligible for scheduling. She ended with, confirm the hours. The next week my manager cut my shifts to 2 days. The barcode page in the packet updated, and my compliance line turned blank. I drove to the address, a rented clinic suite behind a strip mall. Inside, folding beds filled a room, each with a cannula and a headset. A staffer held out a clipboard and pointed at my initials on a form I had never seen. The first line read, wave the break. My first week at North Lake Sleep Center came with a script and a badge that did not open half the doors. I was a night tech, hired through an agency, scheduled to watch monitors and wake patients at 6. The medical director never visited the lab. He sent memos. The memo on day 1 said claims accuracy protected patient safety. It also said all recordings were property of the insurer, and any disclosure was termination. My first patient who spoke was Mark Dillard, a delivery driver sent by a judge after a highway crash. He needed proof he could drive again. He carried paperwork and a coffee he was not allowed to finish. He said he did not snore, he slept fine, and the driver ran the red light. I noted his vitals, applied electrodes, and watched him settle under the camera. At midnight, an insurer rep called the desk. The rep asked for an apnea number. I said we did not score until morning. My supervisor, Dana, took the phone and promised a qualifying result. After she hung up, she opened a cabinet. Inside were adhesive strips and a checklist titled Contingency Interventions. Dana said some patients breathed too well for their own good. She said the insurer needed evidence, then told me to follow the checklist if the screen stayed clean all night. At 2:30, Mark slept, and his tracing looked smooth. Dana entered his room with a flashlight covered in tape. She lifted the cannula, pressed an adhesive strip across the base of his nose, then reattached the tubing so it pulled upward. Mark stirred, but did not wake. Back at the station, the airflow line dipped with each breath, and the software flagged events. Dana watched the counter climb, then wrote notes on the checklist. By 4, the oxygen number slid lower. Mark shifted, his chest worked harder, and the event alarms stacked. I reached for the intercom to wake him and adjust the strip. Dana covered my hand and said the protocol required uninterrupted sleep. She pointed at the memo about claims accuracy. I watched the oximeter dip, then level, then dip again. Mark made a soft sound, then went still. Dana said to mark artifact and continue recording. At 6, I opened Mark's door for wake-up. He did not move when I spoke his name. His skin looked pale under the tape. I hit the call button and started compressions, counting under my breath. Dana arrived, peeled the adhesive strip from his nose, and slipped it into her pocket. When paramedics took over, she told me to export the scored file, not the raw signal. She said the judge needed the summary. After the death, the center held a meeting and cautious phrases. The director appeared on a call and said the event was unpredictable. He reminded us the insurer owned the data and would handle notifications. 2 days later, a fax arrived, addressed to Mark's wife. It denied liability for the crash, citing sleep apnea as a pre-existing risk. Attached was our summary, scored at an apnea index that would have required hours of obstruction. That night, I opened Mark's raw file before Dana could purge it. The airflow curve changed at 2:30 in a step, as if the sensor position shifted. The video timestamp showed Dana entering, then my view cut, masked by a privacy overlay she never used on other nights. I printed the audit log and wrote the file checksum. I did not know what a checksum could prove, only that it could be compared later. I sent a packet to state licensing, the denial fax, the audit log, the checksum, and a note about the adhesive strip. A weaker reply asked for my name and authorization. It said sleep studies were records and the insurer contract limited oversight. Dana met me near the locked cabinet. She said reports breached policy, and she said Mark's wife had complained. She said the insurer wanted the name of whoever touched the file. The next night, a teenager arrived for a sports clearance study. Dana watched the live trace, then tapped the cabinet. I said I would not use the strips. Dana said the checklist was not optional, and she reminded me my badge did not open half the doors. I stepped into the hall to call a supervisor. Dana followed and turned the latch on the supply room. I heard the teen's oximeter alarm through the door. By the time I got out, the teenager was gasping. Staff crowded his bed, and Dana stood in the doorway holding the key. The incident report blamed a cannula and noted my absence. I was fired for abandoning duties. A month later, a subpoena demanded my testimony, and the checksum I wrote no longer matched the file the insurer produced. The raw record had been rewritten. Mark's wife signed a settlement, and the denial stood. A flyer on a laundromat door asked for volunteers for an overnight sleep study, cash payment, no insurance required. The address was a conference room at a highway motel. A woman checked my ID, copied it, and handed me a wristband. She said they were collecting sleep data for a device company. The consent packet listed electrodes, video monitoring, and a blood sample for safety. She slid the page closer, and waited for my signature. They led me to a motel room with a table of supplies. A technician cleaned my skin and placed pads on my chest and legs, then fitted a belt around my ribs. Another tech drew a vial of blood and labeled it with my wristband number. He kept the label in his pocket. When the lights went down, the camera in the corner blinked, then stayed dark. I fell asleep listening to the ice machine. I woke with a dry mouth and a tight feeling in my elbow. The bandage over the drawer site was thicker than I remembered, and there was a second dot below it. The door opened and a staffer removed my sensors, then handed me an envelope of cash. She said results would arrive in 2 weeks. Carts and tables were all gone. The conference room was cleared, as if the operation could vanish between shifts. 3 weeks later, detectives came to my apartment and asked for my full name. They said my DNA had been recovered from a broken window at a pharmacy across town. They held a printout with a lab logo and a barcode. I said I had never been there. They read a date and time, then said the profile was a match. I thought about the motel blood draw and kept it to myself quietly. A public defender told me DNA in court was treated like math. He said juries heard match and stopped listening. I called the number on my sleep study payment stub. It played a recording that the mailbox was full. The website on the consent form led to a blank page. I checked the deposit and found a 3-letter LLC. The address was a mailing service. The company that drew my blood had only paperwork. A second warrant followed. The evidence list included DNA on glass, on a drawer handle, on a cash register. I had been at work during the times, and my time card showed it. But the detectives always acted as if DNA outweighed a schedule. My defender requested lab notes. One page mentioned a control swab submitted by a private investigator, not by police. The swab source was listed as participant sample, coded with my wristband number. I went back to the motel and asked about the sleep study. The clerk said a security firm booked the conference room and paid cash. She kept a binder of invoices. While she handled a phone call, I quickly scanned pages. One invoice listed sleep monitoring and specimen handling. The client name matched the private investigations company from the lab notes. The signature line carried initials I remembered from the tech who kept the label. At the hearing, the prosecutor offered a deal if I pled to 1 count. He said the evidence was overwhelming. My defender asked how a private investigator submitted a control swab. The prosecutor said the source was protected. The judge ordered a new cheek swab. 2 days later, the lab reported a match to the earlier profile, and the prosecutor added charges. I realized the blood draw gave someone a tool they could use again. A letter arrived. Inside was a copy of my sleep study consent with a note. Participant sample retained. Beneath it sat an invoice for case resolution services. $5,000 due in 10 days. A phone number was printed at the bottom. I called from a payphone. A man answered and recited my case number. He said the charges could stop if I paid. He said the sample could travel if I did not. I showed the letter to my defender. He said it looked like extortion, but the court would treat it as unrelated unless we tied it to the lab. He called the number and got a message, then a disconnect tone. The next morning, detectives returned with another warrant, another window, another printout with the lab logo. They asked if I had made anyone angry. I thought about the motel room door shutting from the outside. On my next court date, the prosecutor placed a new lab report on the table, another match. In the hallway, I passed a bulletin board. A flyer offered cash for an overnight sleep study, no insurance required. At the bottom, it said participant samples may be retained for compliance. A man beside me tore off a tab and pocketed it. I watched him write his name on the back, using the wall as a desk.